What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Stupid Fans Club. I am your host, Shaan Donn, and welcome to the club. If you are not already subscribed, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page and follow us on TikTok at Stupid Fans Club. We would love to have you join along. We are here to talk all things college football. The regular season ended a couple of weeks ago, and the bowl games wrapped up this weekend, and they were just as explosive and exciting as this entire season has been. And we're here to break it down. Let's start with the biggest of them all, the SEC championship. UGA defeats Texas 22-19 in overtime here. And that was a heck of a game. It gave you all the excitement that you could ask for, although it wasn't a high-flying, high-scoring football game. This was very defensive-minded. And Georgia seemed to have a bend, not break defense. It seemed like Golden from Texas was catching 75-yard passes on every possession. It was some big play every single time, but it only ended up in field goals. And then, of course, we had Auburn for Texas missing some field goals that helped Georgia out as well. But I believe it was a 6-3 half. No touchdowns for either team in that first half, but Texas seemed to be playing better. And then, of course, obviously at the end of the half, Georgia trying to go for a Hail Mary from midfield, and Carson Beck gets injured as his hand got restricted while he tried to throw the ball. And we'll get into that. Ultimately, it is now known that he's torn his UCL and apparently has no timetable for his return. And it's looking unlikely that he'll be ready for our first matchup there in the Sugar Bowl. So that will be something to watch out for Georgia. But Carson Beck is hurt at half. Georgia gets the ball out of halftime, and Gunnar Stockton goes right down the field and gets us in the end zone. I love the energy, the tenacity, the edge that he came out with. Gunnar is definitely a dual threat, so he is more of a running and escape quarterback as well. He's definitely very mobile, physical quarterback. And I just felt like he gave Georgia a necessary boost. You know how we've talked about all season, Georgia gets off to these slow starts, and so it just takes a while for them to crank up their engine. And right out of halftime, Gunnar Stockton comes out, gets us right down the field, and puts us in the lead for the first time in the game. And then Georgia, I believe we got another field goal there. Texas comes back, scores a touchdown, ties the game. We exchange field goals, and this bad boy goes into overtime. And if you don't remember, Georgia is just coming out of one of the longest overtime games in college football history the week before against Georgia Tech. So I was not at all looking forward to another overtime edge of your seat game here. But Georgia was able to win that coin toss. They were able to hold Texas to a field goal in their possession, and we were able to find our way into the end zone against Texas's defense to have a walk-off win in the SEC championship. That was exhilarating. It was unbelievable. The play just before that, Gunnar Stockton was hit as hard as you can be hit. It was reviewed for targeting. Looked like he may have gotten dazed or knocked out for a second there. He was injured and had to come out of the game, which then allowed Carson Beck to come back into the game, who clearly couldn't move his arm. So everybody in the stadium knows Georgia is running the ball, but Georgia, if we go back to the game in the regular season, they feel like their offensive line is better than Texas's defensive line. And it was very much, we're going to shove it down your throat and good luck stopping us. And ETN found that end zone, and it was just a breath of fresh air, a relief. I'm like, oh my goodness. But when you really think about that, that was one of the most classic games for Georgia there. I mean, your starting quarterback getting hurt, having the backup come out of halftime and march you down the field. He gets hurt. When it goes into overtime, your hurt quarterback now has to come back in to hand the ball off, and you get the walk off. It's in Atlanta. Like, I mean, legendary game. I'll never forget that game. That'll go down in Georgia history there. But the interesting thing with Gunnar Stockton coming in and being the backup, he did have that great drive, and I mean, they were slinging it down the field, backs against the wall, and again, march down the field there. But after that, you could tell Georgia became more conservative and played in a way to kind of just keep the lead and to try to just hope your defense keeps coming out there and stopping Texas. And even when the game got close and tight, it was still very much, we're just going to run the football. You could tell they don't trust Gunnar Stockton all the way to throw it. He did have that interception there, and this was anybody's game at one point. So again, that is something to kind of put a nail in, and because that looks like that's the guy who's going to have to take us all the way. And I felt like, especially when it was clear that Carson couldn't really even move his arm, that's where it became even more important for Georgia to win this game. One, you're hoping Carson Beck can fully recover and be ready for your playoff game. But if not, we need Gunnar Stockton to have as many reps and as much preparation as he possibly can have, because he's running the ship now. And this is not the ideal time to have your backup step in, the first college football 12-team playoff in history. And it's like, hey, man, come take us to the promised land. But listen, Georgia had a walk-on lead them to back-to-back championships. So, I've seen crazier. But we'll see. But that was an amazing game with Texas in Georgia. Georgia 2-0 against Texas here. There were some matchups where predictions for the college football playoff before the selection Sunday came out, where it was like, if Texas got seeded in a certain way, because it was after we won the game, we knew Georgia would be 2, so it all depended on where Texas would get seeded. And it was like, man, if Texas wins their first round game, there's a chance for a trilogy for the Georgia-Texas game. But ultimately, Texas got seeded differently. They're on the other side of the bracket. So it would take both of us getting to the national championship for that to take place. But nonetheless, incredible game. Both teams still in the playoff. And the committee held true to their word. You're not going to get punished for playing in this game. So, it's a win-win. You would obviously like to be SEC championship. The biggest thing for me with Georgia in the Texas game was being new, with Texas being so new to the SEC. You want to show them whose house it is. Georgia came into the season as the big dog of the SEC, pun intended. And you don't want the new kids on the block who are, they got start. They walk with a certain swagger and arrogance, and they're like, this is the big bad SEC. We came in here and won it in our first year. Is the SEC so big and bad? But it still is something to say that they were able to come in their first season and make it to the SEC championship. They have a great team, but I felt like that was another edge. It's like, yeah, it's not a must-win game until I feel like halftime where again you saw Carson Beck go down, but it wasn't a must-win game for either team. But there was some statements, some bragging rights on the line. You're gonna have to hear Texas fans talk about how they came in and are running the SEC in the first year. Have to hear that all season. So good win for Georgia and absolutely legendary game there. Let's move on to Oregon versus Penn State. Oregon is able to beat Penn State in a shootout 45-37. That was a very high scoring, opposite of the Georgia Texas game. It was high scoring and back and forth all game. Neither defense seemed to be able to stop each other very much, although Oregon did get out to an early lead and Penn State was able to march back into it. But watching the game, it always felt like Penn State or Oregon kept Penn State at bay pretty much the whole game. They certainly made it close in some points, but it was just whenever they would make it close, you just would wonder, like, okay, but can you stop Oregon? Can you prevent them from getting in that end zone? And ultimately, when it mattered, they weren't able to do so. But that was an exciting game, and it showed me Penn State can compete with the other two big dogs in the Big Ten, because I wasn't confident they could. With how they looked against Ohio State and how Oregon looked against Ohio State, I was like, I just don't see Penn State competing very much with Oregon. And I can't say they didn't do that. This early on, it looked like Oregon was just going to run through them, but obviously not the best defensive performance from either team. But ultimately, it was a one possession game. So I think that feels good for Penn State. You played the top seed, and it was a close game, and you were able to hang in there. You obviously just want to shore up the defense, if moving forward. But great game. I've heard this so many times that teams take on the personality and the mentality of their coach, and you can tell that with Oregon. They play like that all season long, all the way back to that Oregon game, where you think about how they looked and how I just thought Oregon wasn't on Ohio State's level, and they came out and looked like the more physical team, the more dominant team, the more aggressive team. And I think that's a full result of Dan Lanning there. So big win for Oregon. They've been, besides those first 2 weeks, which are games they won, they're undefeated. But I think we may have all overreacted to how Oregon started the season. But man, they had a heavy correction and haven't looked back since. And they're going to be a tough out. They're clearly the number one seed this season. And I heard someone say, there's no big bad wolf in college football this season. There's no unbeatable team. Although Oregon is the unbeaten team, you feel like, you play a good game against them. You play to the best of your ability against that team, and you're a team that can match up with them. You feel like you can beat Oregon, but they are obviously the one that someone's going to have to figure it out, because nobody has been able to do it thus far. So great game for Oregon. And again, nothing to be ashamed of for Penn State. You're still in it, and it was a competitive game. It showed you can compete, and maybe you get another shot at them and are able to pull it off next time. Let's move on to Clemson versus SMU. That was talk about a crazy game. That was one of the craziest. They pull off a miraculous late game win against SMU. Man, that was crazy. This looked like it was going to overtime. It was tied 31-31. SMU just had this late game drive to tie the football game up. An amazing catch in the corner of the end zone for SMU. They are super hyped up. The energy in that stadium was electric. You could feel it and see it on TV. And SMU is just making a statement. It's like, because they were, again, they knew they were on the borderline here. They knew that it felt like, although they were the top seed and top team in the ACC, it felt like that was the team that, if there was any team that was going to be left out, it was going to be SMU. And let's see how you look against a Clemson, a real ranked team, a proper opponent. And it was not a blowout at all. It was a back and forth game. SMU showed that this is not a Georgia TCU situation. This is, no, we really can compete. And so that's a win, and ultimately proved to be a win for SMU in that regard. But you're thinking, okay, we got an overtime game here. And that kickoff return for Clemson changed everything. There were only 16 seconds left on the clock when Clemson got the ball back. And man, that kick return, man, that was an incredible play for Clemson. They got the 2 plays. They knew exactly what they needed to do to get this into field goal range. They weren't far off from it at all. They got 2 plays, got into position, and they kicked a 56-yard field goal for a walk-off win against SMU. Unbelievable. Clemson finds a way to get into this college football playoff. After you think about the start of their season and how they looked against Georgia, getting blown out, everybody's saying Dabo is gone. He needs to get with the times. He doesn't want to go in the transfer portal, and it's clearly hurting them. And then they just go on this crazy run and look like one of the best offenses in college football. And then they kind of teeter off a little bit and they're like, oh, they're not that good. They lose to Louisville. They lose late to South Carolina. And you're wondering, like, okay, how good is Clemson? So this was an interesting matchup. That was the most intriguing matchup for me coming into the weekend because, one, you want to see how good SMU actually was. Are they really a competitive team? They don't have a great strength of schedule. Like, are you really a competitive team, or are you just benefiting from a lighter conference and a light schedule? And again, I feel like SMU proved without a doubt that they are actually a good team. Now, some will rebuttal that and say, how good is Clemson actually? But Clemson is a ranked team. They've beaten some good teams this season, and that's not a cupcake win there. So I felt like that was it was a win-win. A lot of these, you're not punished for making your conference championship, so a lot of these are just win-win games for other teams. Obviously, SMU is right there. At that point, you want to win the game, but they're in the playoff, so you refocus and you try to go win yourself a national championship at this point. And then the quick hits games, you had Arizona State. They leave absolutely no doubt who the best team in the Big 12 is. They destroy Iowa State 45-19. Big win for Arizona State, and they march themselves into the college football playoff with a bye, which we'll discuss. But good for Arizona State. They were a highly doubted team. No one had them winning the Big 12. No one expected them to be this competitive this year, and they came out of nowhere. And in a conference that was so wide open, and Colorado still so much of the attention, especially when they started winning a bunch of games, and everybody has their eyes on them. And then next thing you know, there's Arizona State, best team in the Big 12. And man, they showed that they may be overlooked without cause here. So good win for them. And then Boise State defeats UNLV. Ashton Jeanty runs for 200 yards again. same drill, same thing as always. This is where we get to see. I mean, I think that's fantastic for Ashton Jeanty, obviously a Heisman candidate, and I think that's fantastic for Boise State. Bravo. You're the 4th seed. You're the 3rd seed with the bye week here. You'll be judged based on what you do when in your matchup end of the day. And I really I think it's great for Boise State, but do I care about what they're doing right now in that conference against that schedule? No, I don't. I think what Ashton Jeanty is doing is incredible, and I don't think it should be overlooked. He should definitely be a Heisman candidate. But we're going to get into the bracket breakdown and them being a 3 seed with a bye week. I mean, we'll get into that. So, but again, they'll be judged based off how they perform against these top 12 teams or whoever their matchup will end up being. So, but good win for Boise State. They are in it. And let's wrap things up here with a bracket breakdown. The college football playoff. We just had Selection Sunday. We know our matchups, our first round matchups. We know who is playing who and where they're playing and the top 4 seeds, who gets the bye week. So let's jump right into it. Starting with the top 4 teams, we have Oregon, rightfully so. Georgia, go Dogs. Number 2. Number 3, Boise State. And number 4, Arizona State. Those are your 4 teams who get bye weeks. And then we got the 8-9 matchup, Ohio State versus Tennessee. A lot of people think that's the best one in the first round, best matchup in the first round. Then you got the 7-10 matchup with Notre Dame versus Indiana. And remember, these first round matchups will be home games for the higher seeds. So that's going to make it super exciting. Notre Dame playing Indiana. Clemson will play at Texas in the 5-12 matchup. And Penn State will host SMU in their matchup. Let's start with the question I've been seeing a lot. Who has the easiest path? Or I'll say, who has the most favorable path? Because these are the top 12 teams in the country, so have to use the word easy relatively. But if you look at Penn State and you look at their path, they play SMU, and SMU, I felt like, showed that they belong. They earned their way into this playoff for at least an opportunity. But that's the 11th seed. Penn State, you just went toe-to-toe with the number 1 seed. You've seen scarier teams than them all season. SMU's record against ranked opponents isn't great. I actually think they are winless. And, you can't underestimate them, but you like your chances in that game. You don't really fear Ashton Jeanty, and you'll have to keep him under control. But that defense at Penn State and their weapons, you feel like they can definitely take Boise State. And then you potentially in the semifinal would face a Georgia or Notre Dame or an Indiana. But I mean, look, you're facing a potential Georgia, no Carson Beck at quarterback. We still kind of have to fully see how that looks, even though we got a glimpse of a half of that, or a half and a half overtime. And then, Notre Dame is obviously, that will be an incredibly tough matchup there. And Indiana, it's like, that should be a tough matchup, but that is a favorable path. It will take some time for them to face a team before they get to the national championship where they feel like, all right, we know from the very beginning this is going to be tough. With SMU, again, you can't underestimate them, but they don't leave you shaking in your boots. and same with Boise State. After that, you're in the semifinals. It's going to be a tough team. You expect it to be a tough team from there. So it's like, why not? Why not win this game, and why not win the national championship? So favorable route for them at Penn State. I think the Texas and Clemson matchup, that I believe they were saying the 5 seed and maybe the 12th seed are favorable seedings. For Texas, I think this is the most favorable. You like your chances against Clemson. You saw what Georgia, another SEC team, did to them. And you know Clemson has been up and down throughout this season. South Carolina was able to take them down. And again, you just like your chances against a Clemson team. And your reward is playing Arizona State, who is a fine team. But as Texas, you would feel like you are on another level than Arizona State. And so, boom, you look up, you're in the semifinal, 1 game to the national championship. So Texas and Penn State, the 5 and 6 seeds, absolutely have the most favorable matchups. Notre Dame and Indiana, that is anybody's game. And Ohio State and Tennessee, that is anybody's game, although you would slightly favor Ohio State there. But, I mean, kind of don't know with Ohio State. Tennessee, it is, and I would say that too. Tennessee, I don't know that they play a ton of games in the cold, but it's not like Tennessee is Miami. It is pretty cold there, so I don't know that they will be so thrown off from playing in cold Ohio at this time of year. So, and we saw how it kind of looked against Michigan. I'm sure it was cold in that game, and you know they didn't look like the same explosive offense. So, and Tennessee has a good defense. They have a good running game. I mean, man, that is anybody's game. So, certainly tough routes for the 8 and 9 and 7 and 10 seeds there. Let's take a look at Georgia. We touched on it a bit, talking about the SEC championship. Georgia is the number 2 seed. You get the bye week. You're positioned right where you want. But the biggest factor here is you have no Carson Beck, and you potentially won't have him. We have potentially seen Carson Beck play his final game with Georgia. And so it's like you go all season with the ups and downs we've gone through, and you win your conference, you get the bye week, you do everything you want to do, and it's like, oh yeah, now you don't have your quarterback to move forward with. I think, is there concern for Gunnar Stockton having to lead the way? I think there is concern there because it's, one, your backup, so he lacks experience. He hasn't necessarily played in must-win, gotta-have-it football games. And, you know, just that lack of experience on the highest level, the expectation of quarterbacks at Georgia, and, you know, that's tough. Although he does bring some things that you like to the table, Carson Beck has been there before. One of the things people always say is how he doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. He always stays poised. And, you know, you just kind of got to hope for the best with Gunnar Stockton. He was obviously thrown into the SEC championship. And so they were understandably playing more conservative and being a bit one-dimensional. But you cannot win a championship like that against these tiers of teams. You're going to have to be able to throw the ball, keep defenses off balance. And again, it's not like Georgia's offense in general has been just this explosive force to be reckoned with all season. They typically, can get started after they get warmed up, but usually that first half is seems to always be a dud. And I mean, you're adding, if you're taking away the pass, if you're not comfortable in your quarterback throwing the football, and you're playing the top 12 teams in the country at this point in the year, and you're just a one dimensional, all they have to do is worry about the run. I don't know if you can, they were able to pull it out in overtime, but trying to win a championship that way isn't sustainable. And again, with the nature of Carson Beck's injury, it's not like we can just say like, all right, let's just get past this week. It's like he may not play at all. So definitely some concern there, but there are a lot of things I like with Gunner. First of all, again, one of the things that I love Carson Beck's poise, but there were sometimes I questioned his edge, his tenacity. It was like, where's the dog? Like, bro, you're Carson Beck, bro. Play like it. I want to see that fire in you. And it didn't take long at all for me to see that with Gunner. I think he ran for a first down, lowered his shoulder, and then start talking to the Texas defender on his first drive in the SEC championship against Texas. I'm like, man, I like that audacity. And and obviously his ability to be mobile is something that Carson Beck does offer, but he only brings that out when he feels necessary. And this is kind of, that's more of Gunner Stockton style. So it'll present a different look for teams. And I think we can have some success, maybe some more extended plays where Carson Beck may have taken a sack or something. But we'll see. We'll have a good deal of time for prep here. But obviously, there's going to be some concern with moving forward with your backup quarterback. Now, I mean, like I said, I've seen crazier. Georgia is not out of this. Teams better not come in underestimating Georgia, because it's like, oh, it's not Carson Beck, it's just their backup. It's like, okay. I mean, you saw the SEC championship, and they better not underestimate Georgia. But that does put a little asterisk. It's like, yeah, you're facing Georgia, but it's not with their key piece at QB. And I'll say Carson Beck has been playing better. He hasn't been turning the ball over like he was in the middle and late in the season. And so it is a big loss. I hear some murmurs about like, I prefer Gunner. It's like, let's slow our roll here. Okay, let's slow our roll. So that's that. In terms of the bracket altogether, I think, as I did more research and listened to people's breakdowns on it, it's clear that there is a push to value these conference championships, but man, that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. And it's because you get these uneven rankings or brackets here, and strength of conferences are different, right? I think the college football playoff should 100% be ranked off of the top best teams in the country, not the team who won in the group of five and all of this. And obviously these conferences they want to keep the conference championships, and they want to keep the value that holds. But at the end of the day, there is no longer a need for that. Put the top 12 teams in the college football playoff, rank them based on their rankings. And listen, if 3 SEC teams are 1, 2, and 3, and they all get bye weeks, then so be it. We're getting the best matchups. And I think so. There's several things to take a look at here. One is there is a need for centralized scheduling. Like, these teams just being able, these programs being able to pick their schedules and pick these cupcake teams and place them where they want, that can't continue, because then you will every single year we'll have this strength of schedule debate. Like, there needs to be a centralized schedule, and obviously you can't control. Some teams that you play aren't going to be that great. Some of them are going to be great. You can't really predict every time exactly how teams will turn out, but that would help a lot if there's a committee or someone in charge outside of these teams in charge of making the schedules. They all play the same amount of conference games and non-conference games or whatnot, so you can assess these teams a little better. And the issue with rewarding conference champions is you get what we have now with Boise State and Arizona State with bye weeks, and Ohio State, teams like Texas and Penn State, who are ranked higher but somehow are having to play in the first round. And then on top of that, you look at Oregon's road. We talked about the easiest way or the most favorable way to the national championship. You look at Oregon's road, they somehow have the hardest. After being undefeated, after winning their conference, they will potentially have to rematch Ohio State, who they beat by 1 point earlier this year. And then you win that game, you potentially are going to go and face Texas in the semifinal, and then potentially Georgia to win the national championship. That is, and again, we're just looking ahead and assuming these games. Who knows who they'll actually face? But that road to win a national championship versus, let's say, a Penn State, who wouldn't have to, their toughest opponent wouldn't come until the semifinal game. Same for Texas. So, when you do the whole value the conference champion, you are now pushing teams who are actually better. You're pushing them further down in the rankings, which is now hurting their conference champion or the best team in the bracket, and that's unfair. And obviously, we talked about Oregon and their mentality, and they're obviously not gonna back down. I have a feeling that turns Dan Lanning on. He wants it hard and rough. But yeah, man, I think there's no need for conference champions, and the top best 12 teams should be in the playoff. And then you avoid this SMU and Alabama conversation and debate that's going on right now. Alabama has the 3 losses, and SMU has 2 losses. They've lost both of their games against top 25 teams, and they have a 57th strength of schedule, while Alabama has an 18th strength of schedule. And you look at Alabama's best wins, it is Georgia, Missouri, LSU, and South Carolina, all tough SEC teams. And SMU's best wins are Duke, Louisville, and Pitt. With all due respect, it's not even close with who has the better wins here. And so, again, back to the centralized schedule, man. You're just playing. You benefit from your conference, and that doesn't differ from the NFL very much. Like, where you have teams who win their division and they automatically get in. They automatically get into the playoff because they won their division. But it's also not the NFL teams over here seeing like the weaker teams and the teams who should be bad or teams you know have no shot at beating you, and then put in a bunch of them on your schedule. It's a lot of this is the eye test, man. As up and down as Alabama has been, it's just hard. I mean, you're looking at a Arizona State team and a Boise State team who have had great seasons, but in no world do I think that they're better than Alabama. I don't think SMU is better than Alabama. And again, it's about putting the best top 12 teams in the country. If we really want to talk, I don't think Alabama is better than South Carolina. Let's really talk. Like, if you're just watching the eye test and how teams are playing right now, I mean, there's so much. It's exciting for this college football playoff. We don't want to ruin it with all these complaints and what could have and should have been. But it definitely leaves more to desire, and there are huge holes that they'll need to fix and fill in moving forward. And I think they probably know that and expected that. It's not going to be perfect on its first iteration, but you just hope that they can build on it and make it better and make it more even and give us the games that as fans that we really want to see. And let's not like leave teams out unnecessarily. So that is that, man. It's going to be exciting. Shout out to the Buffs, Colorado. They have a really good bowl game, although they missed the top 12 or the college football playoff. They have a game against BYU. Now, we all know how this goes. It is transfer portal time, so who knows who will actually be on the field for both of these teams. But during the regular season, BYU was a heck of a team, and Colorado played really well. They'll want to go out with a bang, and this is the end of an era. This is the end of an era, man. I tried my best to just cherish all of these games because this is definitely a moment we're going to look at 3 to 5 years from now and be like, man, you remember when Colorado had Shador and we were watching every game and Travis Hunter was doing something amazing every game and playing both sides. Like, that was a moment. One of the most powerful things or quotes I've heard was most people don't realize a moment is a moment until it's a memory. And so that's why it's so important, man, to cherish every moment. And I'm getting super sentimental over college football right now. But, man, you really got to cherish that. You really got to enjoy those moments while you're in it. And Colorado, man, they had a heck of a team. They were prime time football. The coach and the sons dynamic. Travis Hunter, and a one-of-a-kind player who will be a Heisman winner here shortly. I mean, that was an era of football. They lit college football on fire, brought so much excitement. My number one must-see TV team. But with that said, it's the start of a new era. So they have a new quarterback coming in. I hear they have Odom from Alabama coming to visit, 5-star receiver there. And I'm sure there's many more to come. So while it is sad to see this particular era come to an end, there's going to be more exciting football to see from them. I think Coach Prime is a fantastic coach, and I don't think this stops here. I think we'll continue to see them get better and better each year, again, as they get more players, as he continues to instill his culture into that program. And he's obviously a big attraction. Like, I know that he is probably a tough coach on his players, but you can tell he really loves his players. He's really passionate about this. And so, he's an attraction. Like, it's hard to see why some players wouldn't want to be coached by him, an NFL legend like that, and everything that he offers there at Colorado. Man, what a season of college football. We will have a bit of a break here before the bowl games are underway. We do have Army Navy game coming up. That's always exciting. And then we get to the first round of these college football playoffs. We'll obviously have some bowl games as well. But, man, it's going to be exciting. The first 12-team expanded playoff here. Can't wait to see the results from this. And we will be back updating you with the latest and greatest in the world of college football. Again, it is Shaan Donn, Stupid Fans Club. Thanks for checking us out, and we will be back next week. See you, folks.